Need to get some darker shades on my window behind me. Cut that glare out.
I don't know what's behind me, but it looks okay. A bunch of stuff.
Please remain on the line and the first available.
And we are live. Let me get this out of my way here. All right. Good morning, everybody. John Harris here, managing partner with Fortune Management, and I'm here with Mr. Lee Pennington, who is a dental specific. Are you dental specifically?
Pretty much. We're healthcare specific. Most of it is dental. Yes.
Yeah, healthcare specific CPA out of Atlanta. And you work, do you just work in Georgia or do you work in other states?
No, we have some clients in some other states as well.
Okay. Tennessee?
I do. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. So he is prepared to answer a lot of the questions that we're getting, coming across our plate at the moment regarding the HR 26 or 6201, and then the recent CARES Act and the expansion of the FMLA. Very hot topic right now. A lot of questions are coming up about that and how, what it means, what choices do I have, what options do I have, what do I need to do, and all those kinds of things. And I've also asked one of my favorites, Dr. Tina Harrington down here out of Suwanee, Georgia. She's a multi-location owner down there. Very successful practicing dentist, has a couple of fantastic teams down there. Just does incredible wealth of knowledge all the way around. She has, and a reason I wanted to bring her on is because she's got a really unique perspective from the dentist perspective. What it looks like, what concerns you guys are running into, and I think a lot of the questions that she's going to bring up are going to be questions that virtually every practicing dentist out there is going to have. She may have it on a little bit bigger scale because she employs probably 30 people, 42. Yeah, employs 42 people. So she's got a big organization down there. So a lot of these things may be on a little bit bigger scale for her, but I think the questions will be the same. The issues will be the same regardless if you've got 2 employees or 200. So good morning, folks. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thank you, John.
Excellent. Tina, you doing all right in Suwanee?
I am. How about you?
I can't complain. It's interesting. I have been busier the last probably 8 to 10 days than I am when all my offices are open.
I bet you have.
The only difference is I'm not traveling as much. I'm in the office, so I'm able to do a lot of the stuff that, I want to be doing more of, like these things I think are really valuable. I want to be able to do more of this stuff. I just can't when I'm burning up the road, driving 60,000 miles a year. There's not much time to do that,
Wow, that's a lot of miles.
Mm-hmm. So I tell you what, why don't we start with Tina and see what would you say, and I'm going to write these down as you go so we can make sure we get these questions answered. What would you say with obviously everything that's changing and everything that's coming up from an employee standpoint, from a tax standpoint, what would you say the biggest questions that are coming up for you are?
I think there's a few things. It just seems like there's a lot of conflicting advice.
Mm-hmm.
One person says do one thing, one person says something else. And some of that is coming from the bills. They pass and then there are changes or there's uncertainty there. So what I need to know, first of all, is what to do with my employees right now. I know there's some things that don't even take effect until April, but we have 2 more weeks until then. So I'm a little bit confused about what to do right now. And then I have another question about employees that are out of work because we're closed, but they're not quarantined, they're not sick, they don't have children that are out of school, so they don't meet any of the criteria for the emergency sick leave, but yet they're out of work. So I'm not sure what to do with them. And then on an ongoing basis, if we go 2 or 3 months with this and the FMLA starts, the funding questions, the SBA loan, what does the forgiveness look like for that? Is that something that we should apply for and expect forgiveness, or we should apply for and not expect forgiveness, or what exactly is going on there?
Okay. So I'll run through real quick what my high points on the recommendations I've been making to a lot of my clients are, and then Lee is going to tell me how wrong I have been, or if I'm at least worth some of the money that they pay me. So first and foremost, I would say you've got to protect the practice first, team second, self third, right? So if we run through all of our cash reserves to provide payroll for employees that need it for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, and that eliminates all the cash reserves that were built up in the business for protection, then great, everybody's mortgages are paid for the next 2 or 3 weeks. They don't have to worry about deferment, but they may not have a practice to come back to. So I think if you're in a financial position where you can do both, then that's the perfect storm, right? That's perfect scenario. If you're not, then I think it's important to preserve the financial stability of the practice first, and then the team if you have the cash resources available, and then obviously you're the business owner, so you're pretty much the bank, right? So and then myself as the business owner. Based on one of the things I'm recommending to all my clients, and this includes their teams, and that is to request deferral on every loan that you could possibly request deferral on. So if that's because we don't know how long the thing's going to last. If that's your student loan, if that's your mortgage payment, if that's your car payment, if that's a practice loan, I know Bank of America is doing an automatic, essentially an automatic 90-day deferral. Patterson's doing a 90-day deferral on all equipment loans. So it's been pretty easy to get some of those things deferred. People are kind of expecting it. Second thing I would say is refinancing. If you can refinance your mortgage, refinance a practice loan, do a debt consolidation. Now's the time to do it because the rates are a lot lower. So I would say that's a really good thing to look into. The SBA disaster relief loan, whether you qualify it or not, whether you need the money or not, I would go ahead and apply for it and get the maximum amount of money that you can get. If you don't need the money, you can turn around and pay the loan off, or do whatever you need to do, or potentially invest it, pay off some credit card loans or equipment loans, or invest it somewhere else with a little bit higher return. And then I would also say on your line of credits, I would be requesting extensions on my line of credits. And if you have a line of credit that you're not currently using, because banks are shifting a lot of resources, and potentially there is a possibility that we could potentially see a freeze on a line of credit because resources are being shifted in other directions. Go ahead and pull the capital that you got in the line of credit into your checking account so the cash is available. And then if you don't need the cash, then turn around and pay the line of credit off. And then the last thing I would say is because we want to preserve the interest of the practice, the team, and then myself, if let's say I've only have the financial resources to preserve the financial health of the practice, then automatically I wouldn't do termination because there's a lot of paperwork and formalities that are associated with that. Plus, you have to automatically pay out any unpaid sick or PTO. And so what I wouldn't do furloughs, because furloughs, I'm not sure how that works. I think the furlough does not exempt you from, correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, if you do a furlough, the furlough doesn't protect you from the emergency sick leave portion, or one of the portions of this bill and this act that have come out. So what we're recommending is temporary layoffs, providing a temporary layoff letter. And then if an employee wants to use their PTO or their sick leave, then obviously, give them the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And then allow them to take unemployment for the first 2 weeks. And then if you have somebody that qualifies for the emergency sick leave portion, then we can address that as the time comes. But based on what I'm seeing with this bill, the CARES Act, which we'll look at, that a dental practice owner is not exempt from the emergency sick leave portion of that. They're not exempt from that. So that will apply to you. If you have an employee that does not fit into that category, there is not a tax exemption for those employees. And that's supposedly what the SBA relief package is there for.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot to all of that, of
Yeah.
course. And there are certain provisions that are being enacted from the Senate CARES Act and from the Families First Coronavirus Protection Act that was passed earlier this week. So there are just a number of details. And the unfortunate part of this is the bill was passed last night after several days of contention within Congress. And it's 880 pages long. It was released sometime during the middle of the night. Nobody's had really, or I certainly haven't had the time to read through 880 pages and see what all the details are. So with the passage of any legislation, what typically happens is the bill goes to the regulators who issue the rules that you have to follow. And so some of what we read in the law may be a little bit different in the practical application of it. But the general guidelines are there from the law. And what we do know is the temporary leave, the 2-week and the 10-week, is only for those that are directly impacted by the coronavirus. Now, one of the provisions in the impact is if they have school-aged children and they have to stay home because there's no school care for their children, then they would be covered under that. But I think what we're going to see, and as things come out from the Senate CARES Act, the relief provisions that are there for employers is going to, it's encouraging employers to keep their people on payroll. And with the SBA emergency program, there will be grants for the payroll portion of that. There's going to be payroll tax credits. There's going to be deferral of time to pay your payroll taxes. So there's a number of things that come into play for any business owner, whether it be a dental practice or any other type of business that's under that 500 employee requirement. So how that all works out and how it all plays out is yet to be seen. My belief is that this is what is intended, and the implication for us as small business owners is that we will provide payroll to our employees, file for the SBA Emergency Relief Act provisions, and you will be reimbursed for those costs to keep your people on payroll. Now, it looks like that's going to be for an 8-week period, and that money will be forgiven. So you will not basically be a grant instead of a loan. There are going to be provisions around that. The regulations are yet to come out, but basically you have to use the money to pay for employee costs. And that would include their health insurance. If you're paying for that currently, it would continue to do that. It would also be for the money that you use to pay your rent or your mortgage payments, and accounts payable and other overhead costs. So it's not just that, from what I read, you won't be able to take that money and go pay off other debt with it. That's not the intention of it. It's to keep the practice or a business open during this time period, and to keep the employees fully engaged and fully paid. When this thing is over, I think the economy is going to be ready to take off again. Without this, there was no issue in the economy. Everything was going extremely well. So I believe that we're going to have a lot of pent-up interest in people getting back to getting things taken care of, coming to see their dentist, doing all the things that they normally would have been doing anyway. So in Georgia and many other states, to address one of Tina's questions, what do you do with your employees now? We are required as employers in Georgia, and again, most other states are following some similar issue, to report the pay that your employees are receiving today versus what they would receive under their normal scheduled time. And then they would be eligible for partial unemployment for the difference in what they received and what their maximum employee unemployment compensation would be. So that's the first step in Georgia. And again, most other states have similar type programs that you would need to follow to be sure that you're doing that. So that's kind of the employment thing in the nutshell. There is that we're going to have to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. The first act is not come into place till April 2nd. I think the law that was passed last night was 15 days from last night, so 14 days from today. 2 weeks from today is when it will kick in, the requirements under it and the benefits. One of the things that was kicked around and bantered about, and I don't know how the outcome of this is going to be, is they were increasing unemployment benefits by $600 per week.
Yeah.
One of the things that were going on within Congress was some people might actually make more on unemployment than they were making working. And I think there might be some regulation that comes out to kind of deal with that too. So we're yet to see on a lot of things, and we'll have to do what we can to stay on top of it. Here in our practice, again, much what you said, John, is we're working harder right now than we've worked in years, and it's the middle of tax time, and I've only touched probably 2 tax returns in the last 10 days.
It's a good thing they gave an extension on that then, huh?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've been trying to, consume all this information and put it into place and take it and apply it to our clients and help them get through this whole situation and scenario.
What do you think about the, what was it, page 134? Congress apparently got a raise with this bill.
I haven't seen that quite.
You haven't seen that yet? That makes a lot of sense.
I guess they're working real hard too, huh?
I know it, right? Those the 6-hour work days and 6 hours on the golf course, is worth what?
Yeah.
$270,000
from the lobbyist and everything. It's a tough life.
Now that they're having to work 10, 12-hour days, they need a raise.
That's right. That's right.
So what I heard,
there are a lot of provisions. I know that that's one of the things that caused the delay for this, that probably a lot of us as ordinary hardworking citizens are going to be disappointed with some of the things that they added to the bill. But
sure,
unfortunately, that's the politics of the world we live in today.
Yeah. One of the things I heard was on the quote unquote grant, right? The loan that's going to be forgiven. I spent a lot of time reading through that last night on the CARES Act. Now, I got a summary of it that was like 27 pages, not an 800-page version of it. But one of the things I heard is in the event that it is that they do that, let's say, for example, an employer has temporary laid off their employees for the next 2 weeks, and then they utilize this because this wasn't out, right? When we need to know what to do, this wasn't available yet. So it's like, what do you do? And at that time, the best advice that you could provide was, do temporary layoff for the next 2 weeks,
right?
To kind of buy us a little bit of time. If I've done that, and now this bill goes into effect where I'm going to get a forgivable loan to cover payroll at the full amount, do I just pick it up then, and then we just
one of the things I read this morning was it's actually going to be retroactive back to February 15th.
Good. Oh, wow.
So again, that's one of the things, how we apply that, we don't know yet. There will be rules and regulations that come out, to give us the guidance to how we have to follow that. But yeah, it apparently will be retroactive back to that. So one of the questions that I have that's unanswered right now is, as you know, we've had a lot of clients that we've helped file for unemployment for their employees over the last several days under what was required in Georgia, since they weren't working, or maybe they were working a partial week. How is that going to apply if we go back and pay them and they've received unemployment? So there are things like that that are going to have to be figured out that we don't know the answer to. But it does appear that it's going to be retroactive. And I don't think there was anything going on with layoffs or anything like that until about maybe 10 days ago, quite honestly. So I don't think the retroactive back to February 15th is going to impact very many people. But certainly for the last 10 or 12 days, it could certainly impact a lot of us.
Okay. So what would you say as far as Tina's questions are, what to do with employees right now? Would you suggest a temporary layoff until we've got the details of this thing figured out?
Yeah, and in Georgia, you know, if you're not working and you're not paying them, which a lot of, you know, we have a number of clients that have committed to pay for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the regular pay for the employees, because they were in a good position to be able to do that. For a startup practice or a practice that maybe has some financial struggles, that certainly hadn't been the case. So you were required to file for the unemployment if your employees were not working the full deal, and that was a requirement, not an option. It's something you had to comply with. Failure to do so would result in you paying the state the full unemployment that they paid out to your people, and probably some penalties and interest on top of that as well. So that would be the first thing is, you know, if you are not working, you do the temporary layoff and do the unemployment and get them something there if you're not paying them. If you continue to pay them during that time, there's no real requirement to do the unemployment.
And that was by April 1st, right?
That's correct.
Right. So they had to do that by April 1st.
Well, they had to do it in Georgia immediately.
Okay.
If they weren't working a full, they have to do it. The Families First Coronavirus Act goes into place on April 2nd.
Okay. Okay. And if they have been paying employees for this period of time, they do not need to file that yet.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I'm sure, you know, we haven't looked at the other states. We've had enough to deal with here in Georgia, but we haven't looked at what the other states are doing. But most states have something similar in place to compensate employees when there's a disaster that happens in their state.
Okay. And what does the emergency sick leave portion of that? There's certain criteria that says, you know, if an employee, you know, contracts the virus and they're out of work, or if they are symptomatic and they're quarantined for 2 weeks and can't work, or if they have school-age children who are out of school without childcare, or if they are the sole caretaker. There's 4 criteria that they meet. And if they meet that criteria, then after that 2-week layoff period, the employer is required to pay them, I think it's 2/3, no less than 2/3 of their pre-existing income.
That's correct.
For the next, I think it's the next 12 weeks.
10 weeks. 12 week total.
Okay.
Period. So it's 10 weeks for the second portion of that.
Gotcha. And so if they do that, if they're affected by that, then there is going to be a tax exemption or not tax exemption, a tax credit at the end of the year as a form of financial relief for having to pay that expense.
Yeah. So there are a number of things that are going on with payroll related issues, because again, the desire of Congress, or as they state, is to protect the nation as a whole, and that's employees. So there's been a lot of issues, you know, from an employer standpoint of how can I do this to protect my employees, which most of us want to do, fortunately. But, you know, we all can't afford to pay everything out that without income coming in ourselves. So there's a number of things that are coming into play. There's the deferral of your payroll tax requirements can be deferred until 2021 and 2022. So if you are making payroll, you don't have to pay those out right now, and there will be no interest and penalties on those. For me, I'm not so sure that's the greatest thing to do. You know, go ahead and pay the payroll taxes would be my personal preference. But if you're in a tight cash flow position, I can understand that deferral. The number one place that I see that employers get into trouble with the IRS is related to payroll taxes. So that's why I have a little bit of a hesitancy for that particular provision to be used. But it is there and it can be done if so needed. Again, the SBA grants will be out there for those things. And then there's the potential of some credit against your taxes too. And this will cover, a lot of what we have a lot of practices that have independent contractors that work for them either as an associate or as a dental hygienist that floats between several offices in their 1099.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some provisions in the unemployment provisions for them. They will also qualify for some of these, some of the SBA loans as well, since they are self-employed people and not a practice owner. So there are provisions to take care of everybody is the goal here with these acts.
Right. And then I'm glad you mentioned that last one, because that was one of my questions too, as I read through that last night. It was self-employed business owners, independent contractors. There are, and it didn't, the
so-called gig economy, which is the Uber drivers and those kind of things.
Right, right. There is that's a significant portion.
Yeah.
The economy. So, so for what you're saying is there are provisions in there that would qualify them for the SBA.
That's correct.
Relief. What can you go into a little bit more detail on what constitutes a forgivable loan? Is that only for employee payroll? Are there other? Because I saw I saw a lot of stuff in that document last night that was.
It sounded initially like it was going to be only for payroll. What I was reading some stuff this morning, it sounds like it might be also for mortgage payments on your business, your rent payments, and some other overhead expenses. Again, what we'll see is over the next week or two, there will be regulations that will be issued by the IRS primarily and by the SBA for those specific things related to the loans as to how those will actually be applied to the process. For certain, it's the payroll piece appears that it will be a grant. And I think some other things will fall into that as well.
Yeah, and here's a question. This is for me personally. I don't know if anybody else on the line has this question, but what about privately financed loans? There are a lot of people. There are people that have done practice sales that were privately financed by the previous owner. Yeah. A lot of the business that I do, I use private financiers to do that because banks want to be able to collateralize the loan. And for the business that I'm in, there's not tangible assets, right? It's a service industry. So what is that going to be something that falls within the scope of these SBA loans?
That's pretty unclear to me, quite honestly, John. I don't know how that will be looked at since it's an unsecured loan. I don't know. One of my concerns for my practice owners that are selling is not to do owner financing. And there's good reasons to do that. And in some ways with real estate, I think that can be an excellent thing to do, the seller financing. But with the practices, I would not personally recommend that because you don't know what the situation, in this situation, you may not get paid. Right. It may cause that practice to go under and you have nothing at that point.
Right.
So, we don't like that, but in certain situations, real estate's a great one where you have that attached collateral that you can go out and reclaim. If you've been out of practice for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and somebody still owes you money, you don't want to go back practicing dentistry, take over that practice that you sold before. So we don't like that for that purpose.
Right. And so I know the SBA, I know there's availability for SBA relief for the independent contractor themselves. Let's say an associate dentist. Okay. What about for the owner dentist who employs the associate dentist? Do those provisions include, like, for example, Tina paying one of her associates? Does it include that? Or is the expectation that the associate dentist is going to apply for this loan to compensate them?
Yeah, if they're an employee associate dentist, it certainly covers because they're covered as all other employees would be covered. But it's for those that maybe have 2 or 3 jobs where they work one day in one office or 2 or 3 days. And we see that with some specialists, that endodontist maybe that works in one office 1 day a week, another office 2 days a week, and a third office 1 day a week on a regular rotating basis. And they're paid on a 1099 and have their own business identity. They would apply directly to the SBA for their protection. There would be no obligation from what we read for the owner of the practice that employs somebody like that as a contractor to do anything at that point in time.
Gotcha. And then let's see what this, I'm trying to look at our chat feature in Zoom and look at the comments coming in on Facebook at the same time. So I can make sure to get everything covered. What does it? I'm looking at, Tina, did we get all your questions answered?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And then guys, if you've got any questions, whether you're in the live meeting on Zoom or if you're watching live on Facebook, be sure to type any questions into the chat feature on Zoom and or comment on Facebook Live so that we can get those addressed.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
If you do have people that are on unemployment, you know, some you put on full unemployment layoff because of the COVID-19, and then a couple that did partial because they are working a little bit. If they're on partial unemployment, are they still eligible for the FMLA benefits? Are you still obligated to fulfill those?
Great question. And I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
That they are. If they, you know, but under the FMLA, it has to be a direct impact on them. They have to have symptoms, they have to be diagnosed, or they're taking care of a family member that has symptoms or not diagnosed. The only caveat to that is, you know, the addition with children that do not have access to daycare or school during the working hours, so that they're having to stay home and take care of that.
Okay. And then so say we have everybody on full unemployment and that's what they're on right now and they're receiving unemployment. I know there's some gray areas if we take the SBA loans and how that unemployment will be kind of considered in that. But if we start continuing to do their regular pay through an SBA loan, and then somebody uses FMLA, say they have a child that's out of school and then we have to pay them for 12 or 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. Will we use the SBA loan to cover that 12 weeks, or is that something that is later covered by the tax credit?
I think that you can use the cash to pay them, but you will get the tax credit at the end. Now, whether that will be forgiven under the SBA if you're getting the tax credit is a little unclear at this point in time. That would be kind of considered double dipping, I think.
Right.
So I'm sure there will be some regulations, some things that will come out to reconcile those two issues. But right now, today, I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I know there's so many gray areas right now.
But if you will, I tell you what, if you've got questions that we currently don't have the answers for, if you'll type your email address and your question into the chat feature, or email me directly at John, Jon Harris, Harris at fortunemgmt.com. I'll make sure that information gets to Lee or gets to our HR department so that we've got the people who, you know, are, you know, much higher up on the pay scale than myself, much smarter than myself. We'll get the information and get it sent out to the individuals that have the questions.
Okay.
Okay. Another question came in, Lee, when this is coming from, I'm assuming a practice employee. If I have not already filed for unemployment and now I see this thing coming in where I may get my full compensation, do I go ahead and file for unemployment and get those benefits, or do I wait and see if I'm going to be able to get my full pay? And what I would probably say is absolutely go ahead and file, because you don't know exactly when this thing is going to be finalized.
Well, we do know that it's going to be active 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
That's when the law comes into place. So you've got a couple of weeks, and you may have had a week before this. So yes, you would want to go ahead and file for the unemployment if you're eligible for doing that. Yeah. And in this case, in the emergency situation, most states are making everybody eligible for that, at least a partial unemployment, if not full.
Yeah, and from what I understand, they're expediting the process to unemployment benefits. So, for example, there used to be a little bit longer waiting period, and now they've cut that down to where you don't have to wait.
You don't have to do a lot of things that you would normally, because it's not a true, in my view, unemployment, in that you're not fired, you've not lost your job. You just temporarily have lost the ability to work. You're
Mhm.
still employed. And in Georgia, they've cut that down to it's a 48-hour process till you receive your benefit. So the employer goes on and supplies the information related to the temporary layoff, and provides your compensation that you may have earned if you worked for an emergency case or something like that. And then the state of Georgia computes what you would be eligible for, and within 48 hours, they will process that and pay you what you're supposed to be paid.
Okay, perfect. And then Reagan also mentioned that from what she's seeing, a lot of states are not recognizing the furlough. Let's see what her full question was. Or yeah, is that true? Her attorney said that most states don't recognize the furlough and therefore do not recognize that term, but do recognize layoff. You finding that to be the case?
Yeah. I'm not so much seeing that. I don't see a whole lot of difference in the furlough and the temporary layoff. In my view, it's almost exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see that. It's not a term that we've heard applied a lot here to what the furlough truly means. The furlough, from what I've read, the traditional explanation of that is it's just a temporary shutdown,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we're falling under. When we're closing these offices around the state for all types of employers because people are being required to be self-quarantined, et cetera. I don't see a lot of difference in it. I guess each state will deal with that, and from an unemployment perspective, under their own rules. I don't see a difference here in Georgia from what I see.
Okay, good. And I've got the document pulled up here, and I want to, just in case I've got any additional questions, I wanted to run through this real quick. Talked about the sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed. Covered that. And from what this is saying, there's not going to be any personal guarantees, collateral requirements for the SBA loan. They're basically just looking and saying, have you been affected by COVID-19?
Right.
But as far as having to provide certain documentation to show that you've got the tangible assets and collateral, and I guess that's probably because they're gonna forgive the thing anyway, so they probably don't need to know if you can repay.
If it's related to payroll, it's definitely going to be forgiven as a grant. So there are a number of things that are going to come into play. We were trying to log on to the website yesterday and see some stuff, and it was pretty clunky yesterday. I'm a member of a national organization called the Dental Accounting Association, and we as a group are looking at that as well, and trying to figure out some of the requirements for the loans and so forth. And that'll all be forthcoming very quickly now that the law has been passed. And we'll see some things over the next few days. So there will definitely be a need to continue to monitor this and to get active with it. The thing that I would just tell everybody is absolutely plan on applying. It's the whole purpose of this thing. If you can make the decision and you can pay your employees and keep them whole and keep them happy, that will be goodwill for you as a practice owner.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a wise step to take.
Good. So totally in agreement there. And then is this, I'm probably not reading this right, because I went through this entire document last night, highlighted all the high points. And I highlighted this portion that said that the SBA, and I don't know if this is the SBA portion that's going to be forgiven, or if this is the other side of the equation, SBA loan that's going to be used for other types of, expenses and liabilities in the practice. But there's an automatic, let's see here, allows for complete deferral on 7A loan payments. So if I apply for this, SBA portion that's going to cover payroll, Am I reading this right? That's going to be basically never
It's going to be deferred for 6 months, as I understand it. So you'll get the money now, and there'll be a 6 month. Any money that you receive, there'll be no payments that will be made on that
right.
for 6 months. So it's not that you're getting the money and then having to start repaying it, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the loan. I think what I read was the interest will accrue on that during that deferral period on the payment, but the interest rate, I think, is going to be 3.89%, as I understand it.
I read the same thing. I was thinking 3.75. Seems like I saw that.
Might be. Maybe it was 2.89 and 3.7. 2.89 maybe was for nonprofit organizations, and 3.75.
It's no greater than what the existing SBA rate is.
Correct.
It was that or less. Okay.
Correct.
So if I understand this correctly, basically I could get this SBA loan to cover payroll. I don't have any payments for 6 months. And then after 8 weeks, the loan can be forgiven. So is that right?
Yes.
So if this thing's done and by July 15th, that's 2 months, April,
3 months.
Like 3 months.
A little over 3 months.
Yeah. If this thing's done in the next 8 weeks, I can basically get that loan cover payroll and I never pay a dime.
That's right.
Download the Google Home app on a phone.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And then what about SBA loans for the other, like if, for example, if I'm, need to cover mortgage or need to cover some, equipment loans or other things that I have financed, and I get an SBA portion to help cover those liabilities. Obviously, I don't think that's not going to be a forgivable loan.
That won't be forgiven. I don't.
Interest rate will be comparable. The 3 point.
Interest rate. It's all part of this. All those funds, all the funds under this emergency thing can be used to pay for any of that.
Right.
So it will be deferred for 6 months, but interest will accrue, of course. And then that piece of it won't become part of the grant. The one issue that I do not know the answer to, which is it is very, very open-ended, it appears, and I don't know what kind of terms they will apply to it from the number of years that the loan will. It says up to 30 years. So I don't know if you get $50,000, you're going to pay $50,000 back over 30 years. We don't know the answer to that. All that we were able to read at this point in time is that it would be up to 30 years to pay it. So again, I wouldn't want to go that far out if the economy turns around and as we believe it will.
Okay. And so on the loan forgiveness, that not only includes the 8-week payroll period, it says establishes that the borrower shall be eligible for loan forgiveness equal to the amount spent by the borrower during an 8-week period after the origination date of the loan on payroll costs.
Mm-hmm.
Interest payment on any mortgages incurred prior to February 15th, payment of rent on any lease enforced prior to February 15th, and payment on any utility for which service began before February 15th. So the portions of the loan that are used to pay those expenses will also be forgiven too. Is the way to read that.
That appears to be the case.
Okay.
But it won't cover the debt. It'll just cover you can use the funds to pay the interest on it, but they won't be forgiven on the debt, on the principal payments.
Right. Okay. So the interest, not the principal.
Right.
Okay.
So the bottom line is really the only forgivable part is the payroll.
Not truly. It appears that they will forgive some of the other pieces. If you have fully employed your employees, that's part of the incentive for this, is that if you've kept your employees under this and you use the money to pay for that, you will also get some grant money for the cost of some of the overhead expenses of what John just read.
Yeah. So in other words, if you laid everybody off for the last 2 weeks, your facility, quote unquote, has been unused, and you're not going to be able to have the interest on your mortgage, utilities, and rent forgiven because you haven't been in the office.
Right.
Okay.
But if you're working, if under this act, you decide next week that you want to apply for this and pay your employees for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or up to 8 weeks, apparently, until the economy, everybody goes back to work. As long as you're using the funds to do that, then there's the potential for the money to be used for other things, and that potentially could be forgiven as a part of the grant as well.
But if we've had them on unemployment, I guess my question is it mutually exclusive? If we've had them on unemployment now, they're laid off, but then once we apply for the loan and get approved and then bring them back, am I making sense?
I understand the point exactly. And that's what I said earlier, that is a question that I had as well. But as I read it, from what I understand, the law is not in place until 2 weeks from today.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is, if you can do this today, that money will be going back to February 15th. Any money that you apply for can be used for this purpose. The only part that I'm unclear of is if you go back and try to pay people their full pay, even though they've already drawn some unemployment benefits. I don't know how that's going to be worked out. And I'm sure there will be something to reconcile that. But I believe it will be a prospective thing where if we go today, or let's just say Monday for clarity's sake, that you start everybody back on payroll and you're using the SBA money to pay for that, then that will be part of the grant. And it achieves the intent of what Congress is trying to do, which is to keep everybody fully employed or fully paid for their employment, even though they're not.
Sorry.
So that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I guess we can't even apply for the loans yet. So are we just going out on faith on Monday by bringing them back, thinking that the loans are going to come through?
Well, as I understand it, you can apply today, and that process can be started out. Now, again, we were trying to log on to the website yesterday, and it was, kind of overwhelmed and slow and doing a lot of things. I understand that they're putting some procedures in place to streamline that process a little bit too. One thing that I did read was if you're trying to do that, it doesn't work real well with the Chrome browser. They actually recommended that you use Internet Explorer or another browser to try and do that. I caught that after I attempted several times to log in on using Chrome, because that's what we primarily use in our practice. But
yeah, and
so that might help as well.
Yeah, if you try to log in, it'll say, I had a couple of clients call me about this. They were trying to log in and it said websites under maintenance, click here to learn more.
Yeah, and they had an announced maintenance thing. And what they were trying to do last night, it was going to be down from 6 p.m. till maybe sometime this morning.
Yeah. So what I would think, and I think there's a couple different ways to handle this. And before we run out of time, I want to address the stimulus check real quick.
Yeah.
But basically what I would do is if it's going to be retroactive, and let's say employees have been on unemployment for the past week, and then you want to go back and pay them their full compensation from last week, then if you pay them their full compensation for last week, there's going to be some way to identify how much they received through unemployment, and the portion that they received through unemployment is not going to be deducted or forgiven from this loan, because you can't, that would be, like Lee said, double dipping. So what I might do is ask my employees, or have them show me proof of compensation. How much did you receive through unemployment last week, and deduct that from what you're going to pay them, so that everything washes out and everything's even. Does that sound like a pretty?
We don't know what the regulation is going to be on that, John, quite honestly. And I have a lot of questions from, as a tax professional related to the unemployment. If they've received it already, how could you go back and do that? So I don't know the answer to that, honestly. I think that's something that we will get some direction on. I think, again, it will be more of a perspective thing. What's happened has happened. We start on, in my example, we start on Monday and go forward paying them, and we use this grant money through the SBA to do that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And then real quick here, let's see here. Where's it at? All right. Section 2201, recovery rebates for individuals. Recovery checks of $1,200 will be put into the hands of all individuals with adjusted gross income up to $75,000 or $112,500 in the case of those with a head of household filing status. All married couples with adjusted gross income up to $150,000 who file a joint return are eligible for $2,400. Those amounts increase by $500 for every child. So, for example, if you're a married couple with $150,000 adjusted gross income and you've got one child, you'll get $2,900 rather than $2,400.
Let me just add a little planning intention there, and it may not be time enough to work out, but if you had income over the $150,000 for a married couple in 2018, it would get phased out entirely at $198,000. So you would receive nothing if you had over $198,000. So if you're in that category for 2018, but you would be less than that for 2019, you might want to get that 2019 tax return filed so that you would be eligible for it under 2019. Conversely, it could go the other way.
Good point.
You were under 150 in 2018 and you're going to be over that in 2019, you're expecting the refund. Don't file for that yet. You get the stimulus check and take advantage of that money that's available to you there, and then file at a later date. Now, what's unclear is if you do file a later date, will they come and take that money back from you as a reduction in a refund? We don't know the answer to that. I suspect there will be something out there, but in certain situations like we're in today, it's about getting cash, maintaining cash today. So that's why we would kind of look at doing something along those lines.
Perfect. Do you know any accountants out there that will be able to file a 2019 tax return in the next 30 days?
Well, we would if we thought somebody would qualify for this. We would certainly push that out. So, hopefully next week, all this stuff settles out here from what we're trying to do and help our clients, and we can get back to business as normal. My employees are working and preparing tax returns. I just personally haven't touched one, or maybe one or two in the last 10 days, but they are doing that for us.
Good. And just what you just said, the IRS will base these amounts on the taxpayer's 2019 tax return if filed. But if the taxpayer has not yet filed, the rebate will be based on the taxpayer's 2018 filed return. The rebate amount is reduced by $5 for each $100 the taxpayer's income exceeds the phase-out threshold.
Yep.
The amount is completely phased out for single filers with income exceeding $99,000.
Right.
Or $136,500 for head of household filers and $198,000 for joint filers.
Correct.
Okay. And then one last, I didn't see any additional questions come in on the feed here on Facebook, and then I don't see any questions in the chat box. So here's my last question. I also saw a provision in here about equipment, about depreciation of equipment. Basically, the way I read it is if I go out and buy a $140,000 Soleil laser, I can depreciate the entire amount of that Soleil laser in the tax year 2020. Like I don't have to depreciate that over the next 5 years or whatever period of time. I can depreciate 100% of it this year, which would essentially be a $140,000 tax credit.
Yep.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's not really any different than what we've had. It's under Section 179 depreciation or the special depreciation allowance. I mean, that's what we've been able to do. Okay. And that certainly can be a good tax planning tool. It's not one that we recommend just for the sake of saving taxes, but if you can buy that laser that you just said and employ it, and it makes your practice efficient and generates income for you, we certainly would recommend that you take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, there was
one of the other things, John, that the law does for business owners that was taken away with the Trump law in 2018. We lost the ability to go backwards with losses. Now we can, under the stimulus bill, we can now take any net operating losses that we might have had and take those back and apply them to prior years where we paid taxes and get immediate refunds for those. So that's another thing that should be considered by anybody that has had a loss that's been suspended and not been able to take back. You were able to carry it forward and use it in future years to reduce future years' income taxes. And in some cases, that might make more sense to carry it forward if you were in a higher tax bracket going forward than what you would be if you went going backwards.
Right.
But that's an important provision that should be reviewed with your tax professional to be sure that which way is going to be best for you.
Yeah, there was I'm not sure I'm trying to find it in here now because I'm familiar with Section 179. I've got a lot of clients that take advantage of that. We've got some mutual clients that are doing that now.
Right.
So I'm familiar with that. There was something, I must be missing something in the literature here.
There was a brief blurb that I read about requalifying some long-term leasehold improvements to shorter term stuff, and that would qualify for that. And maybe that's what you're reading. And I haven't read that whole provision.
Yeah. I just remember it really stuck out in my head. And I don't know if it was a piece of equipment that you are currently depreciating over time that you're not doing Section 179 on. You can take that and now create the full amount of that. There was something I remember it stuck out in my head. Like it really stood out in my mind when I read it because
I certainly will look for that and see that.
Yeah.
You know, if they've changed the characteristic of the 179 under this law, so something that you bought 2 years ago and you were depreciating over 7 years
right.
for a legitimate business reason at that point in time, and today you're eligible to change that and take the remaining pieces of Section 179 deduction.
Yeah.
That would be a tremendous benefit. I don't know that that's there, but it's something we'll look for.
Yeah. Tell me if maybe I misread it. Very possible because I think it was 1 o'clock this morning when I was finishing this. So if you see, when you're looking through that, if you'll let me know what you think on that, and then I'll continue to dig into this a little bit more and see. But yeah, it was something along those lines, man. It really stood out in my mind whenever I read it, and that's why I highlighted it because I thought it was really important. Cool, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time with us today and fielding some questions and helping us address a few concerns. Tina, I really appreciate you being on with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
What kind of questions can we ask Tina?
Question for you, Tina, as another dentist. So with what we've learned today, are you going to put your employees back on the payroll as of Monday? I'm still just a little unclear what my next step is going to be.
I'm right there with you. I think I'm going to try to get on the SBA website as soon as we hang up here and see what that looks like. And it's just, I still feel like I'm sticking my neck out.
Me too.
Because if I pay the employees, and for me, that's about $150,000 a month, and something happens and either I don't get the loan or it's not forgiven, then I've stuck my neck out pretty far. And I wouldn't say it's unrecoverable, but I'd like to have a little bit more assurance before I do that.
Very legitimate point, Tina. I mean, it is a little scary because it's an unknown, and that's where we're all at, dealing with this. We can certainly read the law as it says and understand the provisions, but we're always concerned about that gotcha that's out there, and what's that going to be. And again, with it just being published last night, it's going to be a few days before we have some answers on stuff like that. So.
Is there any harm in just keeping them on unemployment for another week while we muddle through?
No, I totally get that, and I don't see anything that would penalize anybody for doing that. So, again, this law won't be effective for another 2 weeks from today, as I read it, 15 days from last night. So, I think that gives us some time to figure out some of this stuff and apply it and use the practical implications of what it's going to require to do.
I think that's the route I'm going to go.
That's what I've been trying to communicate to my team, is that we're watching this and there are a lot of changes, and I'm going to do absolutely everything for them that I can do. But until I know what that is, they need to get the unemployment so that they have something rather than nothing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's reassuring to know they're going to pay retroactive, because that might mean any bills they're not paying right now, as they prioritize, that they'll get an influx of money, hopefully, on the other side.
One of the things that you should do, maybe as owners, to help your employees as well, is to encourage them to do some of the things we would encourage you to do. I don't know. I know my wife works for she's an HR director at a pretty good sized credit union, and they are putting into place a 30-day potential moratorium on car loans and those kind of things. So it doesn't hurt for them to call and ask their debtors, their creditors, that hey, can you forgive this month or whatever, or add it on to the end, defer it, however that needs to work. So even with their mortgage companies, there may be some, I kind of doubt that that'll happen, but there may be some out there that will do some things like that. So legitimate things that they can defer, take the same route that we as business owners are taking, and asking for those deferrals and so forth as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. This was really, really helpful.
Good. You're very welcome. I'm trying to
Absolutely.
put together as much of this kind of stuff as I can and bring on, people that know a lot about a lot of the new stuff that's coming out, so we can get some questions answered and we can just get a little bit more certainty in what's happening and what's going on, so we make the most effective decisions for, yourself, your practice, and your teams.
Do you think maybe another call like this could be possible next week once the guidelines become a little more clear?
That's a great idea.
I'm certainly open to. You need to ask the man in the upper left-hand corner.
Yeah, I would love to do that and clarify some of this, because there's so much that we are just, reading this for the first time, and we believe we understand it. But again, as those regulators issue the rules that go around how this is all done, that will lead to a lot more clarity for us as professionals, and for our clients as we try to advise them. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that next week.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say stay plugged into you may be getting the invites to these things via email, trying to get them out via email and social media. So at the least, what I would do is, if you're not getting it via email, just be sure to go in and follow our Fortune Management Mid-South Facebook page, because that's the page that I'm hosting these events on. And so you'll get notifications when I set up new events, and who's going to be, part of that event, what the topic of conversation is. And if you got any questions that you want answered or areas that you want addressed, if you'll DM me on Facebook, then I'll be sure to find the people that have the answers to those questions and do something like this so that we can get those questions answered.
Okay, great.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate everybody joining us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And if you need anything from us, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thanks,
Great.
John. Thanks everybody else.
All right. Yes,
Have a
sir.
good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.